Jian Chao, the investment principal at Future Energy Ventures. Hee Suk-yoon, the head of investment in Silicon Valley at SK Gas. And Tuan Dulafa, the managing partner at Total Carbon Neutrality Ventures. Patrick Segisi, the investment partner at Acario Innovation Tokyo Gas. Vincent Ruinet, the investment director at NG New Ventures. Together, they will discuss whether it is the right time to invest in the hydrogen market. The stage is yours.
Hello and welcome everyone to this panel about the risks and perks of investing in hydrogen right now. My name is Alex Owen Hunt. I'm the Global Markets Editor at FDI Intelligence, which is a specialist publication at the Financial Times focused on FDI and economic development. We're very lucky to have an esteemed set of panelists from literally across the globe with different geographical focuses and from different companies. I'm going to quickly introduce all of them. Our first panelist is Zhijin Chao, who is the investment principal at Future Energy Ventures, which many of you will know is the venture investing arm of European electric utility E.ON. Our second panelist is Hee Jung, who is the head of investment in Silicon Valley for SK Gas, South Korea's largest domestic provider of energy and LPG. Our third panelist is Antoine Delafargue, who you will have seen on the last panel, the managing director and CTO of Total Carbon Neutrality Ventures, which is the venture investing arm of French multinational integrated oil energy company Total. Our fourth panelist is Patrick Segisi, who is the investment partner at Acario Innovation, which is the venturing and open innovation arm of Tokyo Gas, which is Japan's largest natural gas utility. And last but certainly not least is Vincent Ruinet, who is the investment director of NG New Ventures, which you will all know that is the corporate venturing arm of France-headquartered multinational energy provider NG. So thank you all very much for joining us. I'd like to start by setting the scene of what the current state of play is in the hydrogen market. Eugene, I wonder if you could describe your take on where hydrogen is right now, and maybe more specifically, whether the pandemic has accelerated the adoption and the development of hydrogen innovations.
Great. Well, firstly, thank you for inviting us to join the panel and to take part in the summit. It's a huge question to start off with, but to try and keep things short, I think there's certainly a lot of investor interest in the hydrogen space at the moment. But at a very high level, I would say a lot of the startups that we're coming across from a technology point of view, especially for the complex development you need for hydrogen, it takes a lot of time. So it feels that the hydrogen market is somewhat at maybe the peak or near the peak of the hype cycle at the moment. There are a lot of companies that we see where startups are raising capital at pretty high valuations, where technology is still at a fairly early stage, and maybe they're looking to deploy pilot projects in 2022 or 2023. So there's still a bit of lead time before the full maturation of some of these earlier stage green hydrogen technologies. But of course, the question is ultimately, do we think the investor demand and interest is warranted? At a high level, I certainly believe there's a huge amount of potential for hydrogen, and that's why we're looking closely at it. The pandemic, as you mentioned, was certainly a factor, but I think probably one of the less important ones, I think it's more that the pandemic gave a lot of government budgets the opportunity to maybe provide stimulus funding in the attempt to build back better and to support hydrogen as a mechanism for providing stimulus funding. I think a lot of the ultimate interest and excitement around hydrogen comes, for me at least, from the seismic shift in the past couple of years in recognizing climate change and net zero as an imperative. And if you think about what that means in terms of corporate net zero commitments or corporate commitments to climate funds, government activities and government actions, that has shifted the dialogue around climate investing. And if we think about the areas where we don't know how we're going to decarbonize, ultimately, hydrogen comes up again and again as a potential decarbonization solution for those particularly hard to abate sectors. So if you believe that we're going to get to a stage where we are going to invest and pay for a net zero economy, then you have to believe there is a very bright future ahead for hydrogen, even if we're still in the early innings at the moment. And I think you can see the strong government funding from the EU's targets to Germany's commitment of over 9 billion euros for hydrogen, their commitments to electrolyzer capacity. You can certainly see where the demand and the funding will be coming from to some degree.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Eugene. A fantastic starter to our panel. And clearly, I would interpret that as a bullish take on where hydrogen may take us and its potential in the drive for net zero. Hee-jung, what about you? How do you view the hydrogen market at the moment? Does it look different from perspective in South Korea?
Well, I think Eugene has already described all the right things about the hydrogen economy from the outsider perspective, from the corporation. So maybe I should take a different approach from different perspective, from the internal view of hydrogen economy from the corporations, because it is unique. This time last year, it was very hard for me to sell hydrogen deal internally. But because I was asking them to pay higher price to produce hydrogen when we were already making good money on oil and gas products. But COVID hit last year and everyone saw the possibility of clean environment, and ESG became the major trend, right? So compared to electrification efforts, hydrogen gained huge interest to be invested rather more quickly and easily through though there still isn't enough demand or technology for commercial ready stage. So I think that it is right investment timing for hydrogen right now, because it's easier for me to sell internally, and also the trend is there for ESG. So I can grab both of the rabbits at the same time by being able to invest in this field, but technology is not ready yet. So we need to do more from a corporate perspective, working with the government to be able to take this startup technology and embed it into our test beds and see if it really works, and really help them go to market and also into the growth stage of their technology.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. A slightly different perspective, but clearly hydrogen is seen to have great potential also from SK Gas perspective. Antoine, what about Total Carbon Neutrality Ventures? What do you think, I would say, to rephrase the question, what do you think about the current climate makes hydrogen sort of the right option or potential opportunity to explore as an investor?
Yeah, I think the big change is all the carbon neutrality objectives that are popping up everywhere, including Total and countries. So it means that we mean it. We will have to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. Then the question, and hydrogen is such a central molecule for a number of areas to decarbonize, that even though here and there it's still a bit more expensive, it becomes obvious that it's going to have to play a big role because of its central place between managing intermittency of renewables and decarbonizing heavy duty transport or industrial processes. So then the question, actually there are three questions that we are still wondering as an investor is maybe who, when, and what. Let's start with the what. Maybe we need to be careful about what use cases will work with hydrogen and some will not work with hydrogen, or with better with other low carbon options. The when is important, especially for a venture investor. We don't want to be 10 years too early to back a startup, which will struggle for 10 years. So we have still 30 years until 2050. We want to focus on the right time. What's exciting at the moment is we have a boost with all the public, the Green Deal, everything around the policy today is kind of creating this a bit artificial step acceleration around hydrogen. That really helps. So it helps to answer the when. And then the who. And the who is interesting because it's hydrogen mostly is industrial, as an industrial topic. So you could say this is more for big companies like Total or big industrial companies, or you could say whether it works with startups. And that's really where we need to be careful as well. We have to recognize that it's an industrial area, but at the same time, the growth might be explosive and the agility of startup would help a lot there. So, and of course, all the technological innovation that we need are perhaps better developed by startups. So this is really the state of mind. I think it's a right time to invest. We just need to be careful. And also, there are crazy valuations out there, so we need to be extra careful with that.
Well, thank you very much, Antoine. I'm sure we will also touch on valuations slightly later in our discussion. But Patrick, to bring you in, do you hold a similar view? And maybe we can pick up on what Antoine mentioned about use cases. Do you think there's specific applications for hydrogen that are better suited, not as well suited? What's your take?
First off, Alex, thank you. And thank you to the sponsors for having us here today. I think Eugene and he and Antoine, you'll probably hear a very similar line of reasoning from me. There's a lot to be said. I mean, Japan, like Europe, is a net energy importer, and Tokyo Gas is one of the biggest movers of molecules for energy to Japan. And at the same time, Japan has also had a long history of looking forward to how it could gain energy independence. The future state that we're all looking for in the decarbonized 2040s is lots of offshore wind, lots of green hydrogen. That's the molecule that helps power things and helps provide for storage of all those renewables. But the tough part is the next 15 or 20 years and how do we get there? And how do we get there as a company that has a large existing infrastructure? So we've been exploring a lot of ideas. One of them is we as an infrastructure company know how to move molecules around. And if we could actually solve the transportation issue for hydrogen by keeping it as LNG and having interesting ways to convert it at point of use. Don't burn the methane, convert it to hydrogen through pyrolysis or other events or other technologies, some of which are just coming out of the lab. And this is a point too, that a lot of the things we've been following are only just this year coming out into a product box that you can put on a skid, that you can put on a customer site and actually see if it works. So the TRL readiness level for many of the solutions we're looking at is somewhat early, but now is a good time to be investing in exploring options and experimenting to see which one of these could be deployable at scale in the future so that we can get there. But if we can find ways to move the hydrogen as ammonia or methane, convert it at point of use, and then we've solved a big issue in terms of storage and transportation, which is one of the issues that affects mass adoption. So we're looking at a lot of different things. I think it's going to play an important role in the future. And now is the time to selectively invest and see what options we can generate technologically that we could scale later on.
Sure. So again, I think now is the right time to invest. You've got to look at the right opportunities, but thank you also for going a little bit more depth about the sort of technical details. Now, Vincent, to bring you into the conversation from ENGIE's perspective, I mean, we've heard some of potentially the risks and perks of the hydrogen market and investing at the moment. What's your take? Are there unique elements to investing in hydrogen that we should have front of mind as it sort of picks up pace in its drive towards net zero?
Yes, thanks, Alex. So if we look at let's say the main risks that we're looking at when looking at startups in the hydrogen space, I think first, the market risk, of course, I fully subscribe to everything that has been said about the strong push in policies and ambition for net zero. But in this case, there should be a lot of different use cases, and the ambition and the volume of each of these sub-markets of hydrogen is not very clear at the moment. So we have to be very careful about looking at the right type of segment. Then what is also very specific and bouncing back to what has been said by Patrick about H2 technologies is that the strong push has created a lot of early TRL startups, about like between 3 and 7 terms of TRL. So, and very technical, developed by PhDs. So we need to be able to take technological risks, and so you need to have the expertise, and this expertise is scarce. So, for example, at ENGIE, we have R&D people, experts in hydrogen, but you need also to be able to test the technology. Of course, the testing won't be at a large scale, so you need to bet on those risks and leveraging on the expertise you have. Then, which is not a risk, which is not specific to hydrogen, is also industrialization risk. Getting from the let's say the lab to a market to a product. Here, I guess some VCs are asking if this kind of startup is a VC case, because this takes a lot of time and capex usually to get to the market. And here we're looking at specific partnerships that can be created by the startups in order to scale fast in this topic. And lastly, to bounce back also on the valuation issues, we see that all the institutional managers are being pushed to invest in ESG. So when you have an IPO of a hydrogen company or a listed hydrogen company, you see valuation really booming, 30 times revenues, sometimes even more than that. So you need to be careful also with that, because part of it's probably justified by the strong push, but that's also a point of attention for us.
Sure. Well, again, we've got the valuation point being raised, but thank you very much, Vincent, for going in such depth. I mean, it's key to really look at some of the risks and perks of going forward with hydrogen. Now, one key debate within the hydrogen discussion is, when it comes to use cases, is hydrogen-powered cars. And I'm sure we can find a little bit, maybe some conflict in the panel when we discuss this. So, Antoine, I'm going to bring you in here. Where do you stand on the debate about hydrogen-powered cars? And are you a strong believer in its potential, or do you think electrification probably should play a larger role in that space?
Yeah, on that one, I tend to favor electrification for a more physical reason, is that if in terms of conservation of energy, if you bring a kilowatt hour in an electric car, it's going to drive maybe 2 or 3 times more than if you take the same kilowatt hour, make hydrogen from it, and then put it in the car and then convert it back to electricity. So that gives a bit of a handicap. So what I'm looking at is where are cases where this factor 2 or 3 handicap can be compensated or overcome by other advantages of hydrogen. And that's where I see, charging time constraints and maybe the payload. And that's where probably I'm more a believer in heavy duty trucks using hydrogen. But for cars, we also invest in battery technology, and we see how fast. It's not that fast, but it's steady, and the progress on battery is pretty big. So I tend to believe more in electric vehicles for light and passenger cars. But hydrogen definitely for commercial vehicles and heavy duty trucks. Yeah.
Eugene, I seem to remember in a conversation we had previously, you were along a similar line of reasoning. Were you also seeing more in the heavy duty case for hydrogen and not so much in passenger vehicles?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with what Antoine has said. I think in many cases for especially light transportation, it makes sense. We already have very well-established technology with battery EVs. I think there may be specific geographies where the hydrogen approach is preferred. If you think about, Japan being particularly keen with the Mirai and so on. But I think for most of the light EV use, electric vehicles and battery electric vehicles absolutely make sense. So I agree with Antoine there.
Sure. Well, you mentioned Japan. I wonder, Patrick, do you have a take on this?
It's interesting. One of the reasons we're in California is the adoption of EVs has been a lot faster here than in many places, and it's sort of a look ahead to the future. But I'll concur with the electrification for light duty, hydrogen for heavier duty, long distance. I mean, and things like drayage and ports, and Plug Power, for example, which makes a fuel cell hydrogen powered forklift, has been doing a great business in a specific application set, which meets the needs, has those needs of, you don't have a lot of time to recharge, you have to move things, you need power, and you need to go. So I think that's where we're going to find, as Antoine said, in certain use cases where you need specific characteristics like that, that's where it'll shine. Sure.
Now, to broaden it, we have mentioned valuations on several occasions already in the panel, and I wonder whether we can dig a bit deeper into the current state of valuations, and maybe there's specific companies that are a case study in this sense. Hee-Jung, what's your take on the current valuations in the hydrogen market? Do you think is that sort of does that give you room for caution when you're investing for SK Gas?
Definitely, there's some risk, and also we have a great deal of concern when we are looking into different deals into hydrogen space startups, because their valuation is awfully high. And we must not forget that we are all doing this kind of activities to lower the carbon emission. We are trying to get the clean environment back and provide a better tomorrow for our kids rather than today. And in order for us to do that, we need to work with the climate changes and make sure we have less emissions on carbon. And in order for us to do that, we are looking at electrification market and hydrogen market. And just because it's a trend that everybody want to put some money into hydrogen, it doesn't mean that they get to have a higher valuation. But I think it's because of the very simple economics rule that there's more demand than supply, so the valuation went up higher. And there are very few investors who's made a number of investments into hydrogen field, and wherever they put their money in, those companies start to get a lot higher valuation. So we need to be more careful of their readiness level of their technology, and we really have to look at those technology from a corporate perspective. We can support it. Are we confident enough to put the technology into our own chemical plants or in our plot plant so that we can support that company to be able to increase their valuation themselves? So it's a risk, but it's also perk for those startups who's getting higher valuation and getting good tractions on the market and getting more money. I hope that they will deliver their promises, and hope is not a plan, but we got to work with the startups to make that into reality.
Sure. Maybe the mismatch between demand and supply is a call to action for other entrepreneurs. With hydrogen space is the place to be at the moment, if that's a metric to go by. I wonder, Vincent, if you had anything to respond to that. I mean, is that similar position you're holding at NG? And maybe are there other specific applications, perhaps, of hydrogen that you think are particularly attractive at the moment?
Yes, at NG, what we see is that we have today tremendous assets in the world to transport gas, which is the gas grid, the gas network. And in terms of energy efficiency, it's much more efficient to transport energy through gas than through electricity in terms of costs. So we need to leverage on this asset in the most possible way. So we are looking at solutions to address that. We have invested in a company last year that is separating natural gas from H2, called H2 Site in Spain. We are also looking at other kind of technologies like methane pyrolysis, which is able to actually produce H2 from methane, all the way to avoid to have those stranded assets that are there and that are happy to also accompany the energy transition.
Sure. Yeah. Is that those sort of applications? Are they resonating with other panelists? Are you looking at towards similar sort of applications in the hydrogen space? I see.
Most definitely. We're trying. Like Vincent has said, we have an infrastructure that we hope to be able to leverage through this energy transition, and it also turns out that it could be a very useful way for solving the transportation problem. Transport it as gas, convert it through pyrolysis or other methods at the point of use for industrial heat, for power loads. And yes, there is some loss in conversion, but our goal, all of our goal, is to get to a low carbon net zero economy. And this could be a very interesting pathway if some of these startup experiments work out the way that they seem to be going.
Sure. To reframe the discussion, I mean, we've heard that there clearly is investor excitement. There are risks and perks. Valuations have been mentioned, but I wonder. You started the conversation, Eugene, with talking about sort of the stars aligning. The government's getting behind it. Maybe COVID has brought things into focus, and certainly there's a drive towards decarbonisation and net zero. But I wonder is there a sort of a perfect recipe or something extra that's needed to push hydrogen in the right direction to sort of accelerate its development? I wonder if, Eugene, did you have any take on that, how we could maybe accelerate the development in the hydrogen market?
I think from the political side, you already see very strong support for the technology, and that's absolutely critical if we think about how we can invest more in the technology. So clearly governments are already playing their part, particularly in Europe, I think. I think it is ultimately a matter of time. A lot of these technologies will take time to develop. Investor interest is in the technology. We're already funding a lot of you see a lot of investors funding companies within the space. So I think the capital is there. We just need the technology. And I think it's interesting because hydrogen has been through quite a few cycles in the past where people were excited and then, deflated again and then excited again and so on. I think it's just ultimately the technology needs time to evolve. And if there is the sustained interest in that space, then surely more PhDs will be started around this technology, and that will only contribute to a growing and fortifying cycle of innovation to mature the technology.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it just sort of resonates back to what Antoine was mentioning earlier, the right time to get in, 10 years too early, 10 years too late. And I wonder, is this idea of the several cycles that maybe fell off, is this the cycle that's gonna stay the course now? I mean, Antoine, what's your take? Do you think that everything's moving in the right direction and hydrogen will accelerate in terms of development? We will have the technologies that are necessary for our goals?
Yeah, I think so. We've had false starts with hydrogen in the past. I think this one is a good one. But what I believe is more like multiple cycles staggered together with maybe like one on mobility, one on industrial use, maybe one on storing of renewables. And because of all these different periods of growth, I think overall, when we look at hydrogen, it will be a pretty good growth pathway for the next 30 years. So we just need to be careful on which use case pop up in first. So what's good is you have a little bit of a competition from states, so that they are the first or the most advanced economy in hydrogen, which can build their giants that all the other countries are using. We saw this with wind in Denmark, in China with solar panels and batteries in Korea, and I think that Europe is trying to do that for hydrogen because they think that we have the right mix of expertise in Europe. And I think a lot of countries would want to do that. So it's pretty virtuous competition. The drawback of that is having the state trying to help specific technologies like this. I kind of prefer a technology agnostic policy support, like a carbon price, so that the competition is a little bit more and even more even ground.
That's an interesting point. I mean, is anyone want to respond to that in terms of the right policy approach to boosting hydrogen to the next level? Hey, I see you nodding. Do you want to come in?
Oh yeah. I think we definitely need support from government, but I also think that we need to have more demand for hydrogen. For example, we have about 8,000 gas stations in Korea, and government is asking us to turn 10 gas stations with LOHC technology and the other 10 gas stations with different technology. So we are trying out different technology to see what works the best. But after we turn those 20 or 30 gas stations into hydrogen refilling stations, are we going to have enough demand for the customers? Because we don't really have that many hydrogen EVs in the fuel cell EVs on the road yet. So I know Hyundai is making more hydrogen fuel cell cars, but there are not that many on the road, and we are trying to increase the demand by doing something else. And that's why we bet a lot of money into fuel cell technology, into Bloom Energy or to Plug Power. And we already get so much hydrogen from gray hydrogen from existing chemical plants that we have. And we are more focused in capturing carbon from gray hydrogen and putting SMR to make that into blue hydrogen. And I think that's going to be sufficient enough to support all the demand that we have now, and we must increase the demand. So government support is very necessary. We also need the other industry players, like Antoine mentioned about competition, but we also need the demand support.
Sure. Patrick, I see you nodding. I wonder if you had anything to add.
Just echoing things. I think government policies, whether it ends up being carbon tax of some kind, which are politically difficult, but they can help create a framework for what we're really talking about is the scale up and cost down to achieve mass adoption. And so as the cost comes down, you unlock different levels of demand. And as Antoine said, there's going to be many waves where you can reach a price parity level where an application becomes sufficient for it to start to take off in hydrogen. And that helps you get up the scale curve, which gets down the cost curve in the same way that we saw solar and wind. 10 plus years ago, it wasn't 25 cents a watt for PV solar. It was much, much higher, 90+% higher. And as the costs come down, we can unlock more demand, but that demand also needs a nudge too. I don't think the current industrial markets are going to get it there yet. So there's a number of factors at play.
Sure. So we've heard high demand from investors for hydrogen-related opportunities, but perhaps the demand is not quite there. The technology needs to advance that bit further. I realize we're coming towards the end of our time, but Antoine, I want to give you just one last opportunity. Vincent, if you just have any closing thoughts on the pace of our discussion.
Yes, I think that the discussion showed that there is a tremendous opportunity to invest in the hydrogen economy now. Of course, I think the question asked by Antoine are very accurate on what, when, who. And just to finish on the coordination, also what we have seen in the past is maybe very sector-specific policies, oil and gas, transport, fuel for transport, electricity, natural gas on one side. But now with the hydrogen value chain, and that's what we see at ENGIE, those sectors become more and more linked. And that's why also we need, I think, to work together with different actors and with different expertise to make this transition happen.
Absolutely. This collaboration has run through this event. I think this is something that's been sort of chiming and echoing. If we're going to achieve our goals of net zero and decarbonize our economy, there needs to be joint collaboration and working towards common goals. Thank you, everyone, for your expert takes on the hydrogen market. We could have spoken for a whole lot longer, but I'm going to pass back over to the studio. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. It was a pleasure to observe this discussion. And furthermore, I want to say a massive thank you to all of our viewers joining us today. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed all of our speakers, and you will return tomorrow with more exciting guests.